All right, this is the follow up, and we are following up today on a series of live videos entitled Broadway Uncovered Part 1, 2, and 3. My guest today on the follow up is the great Antoine Silverman. Antoine, thank you so much for making yourself available, and welcome to the follow up.
Oh, it is my distinct pleasure, and thank you for your kind words. The feeling is mutual. Glad to
Awesome.
be here.
Excellent. So, for those listening, for those watching, let me just give you a little bit of background. Antoine and I played together on a show called Fun Home. Antoine was the violin player for the Broadway run and the contractor for the off Broadway show and for the off Broadway production, I should say, and for the Broadway production. Aside from being a violin player in New York City, Antoine is also one of the string and or band contractors who work on Broadway and in a variety. Am I correct? Like in a variety of projects. You don't only do theater work, is that right?
Yeah. I actually started with recording work.
Okay.
Yeah, because I sort of got into like early 2000s, started getting into some jingles, and since I was one of the violinists who could improvise, I was getting
Okay.
called a lot to, if you needed a tango track or a country track, or I could do fairly good approximations of a
Right.
variety of styles.
Right. Right.
So I got to meet something that's especially for string players where there are so many of us. And usually if you get called for a string session or a bigger orchestral session, you one of 18 violins, and you wouldn't have the opportunity to meet the arrangers. Plus, it would be poor form to do so anyways.
Right.
It's
Right.
not, your gig. But I was able to develop some like one-on-one contacts with some composers, some arrangers, and slowly but surely over the course of time, because I guess, sort of grew to trust my playing and then
Right.
know me. It kind of became a, hey, can you maybe put together a trio or this, and then it kind of developed from there.
Right.
But it definitely started as the relationship of a player towards a
Right.
composer.
Right.
And,
Right. 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 Right.
yeah.
Very cool. Well, I mean that makes you a perfect guest for the follow up, especially when it comes to the Broadway Uncovered series. In that series, I attempted to shine a light on musicians of color, black musicians, female musicians, who you wouldn't necessarily associate with a theater setting, with a theater gig. There's a lot of I shouldn't say there's a lot, but there's a good amount of literature out there. There's a good amount of representation out there when it comes to uh, your regular musician, I guess, white and male, especially when you look into pretty much any Broadway pit these days. And yet there is a history, there is a tradition of black players on Broadway. There has been a complete underrepresentation of black players, of female players, and I wanted to find out what your perspective is, what that is concerned. What does that look like for you? Is that something that you're aware of? Is it something that you notice? Is it on your horizon at all? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, very much so. In my that I noticed it, and it's a part and parcel of when I'm doing contracting, something
Mm,
that is considered, or if I'm just playing, that
mm,
I'm aware of, for better or for worse, on who's been hired around me.
right,
I think that I do think that there's been some improvement
right,
over the last, you know, 7 to 10 years, in certain respects, but obviously lagging
yeah,
to any sort of real objective viewpoint.
yeah,
Um, what it's interesting because as a violinist, uh, that for a long period of time was, since there's undeniably as many good female or string players as male string players.
Right.
What started happening that I noticed, and many people around me noticed, is that that was sort of like the quote unquote easy place
Right.
to put women in the pit.
Right.
So because maybe the perception was at the time, you know, like maybe an old boys network of big band style thought where maybe like horn player, sax player, like there might be one outlier here or there, but for the most part, brass, you know, like saxes, those were men. Rhythm section, sometimes again, some outliers, but for the most part, men. And since there aren't that many straight wind players, wind books rather on Broadway, just because you know they get condensed into multi reed players for the size of the pit. The logical place to try to sort of fulfill some sort of mythical quota or whatever for women became strings. So you would see a lot of pits where there would be, like, let's say it was a 17-piece orchestra, and there'd be like 12 or 13 men and scattered around, and then there would be 4 women, and it would be all the string players, or, you know, something along those lines. I think that was like sort of like the end of the old era.
Right.
And now that we have moved much more into a newer era, fits and starts, but we are moving into it, in the sense that there's much more of an awareness of, right now I'm just still sticking on the female side of the equation, of great female players on any instrument, maybe sometimes not in the numbers for some rhythm section or certain lead trumpet or what have you, but there absolutely are quality players across the board.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that to kind of just slightly step to a sidetrack to the question and then loop back to it, that, you know, something I'm sure that you have seen over your time becoming a successful Broadway player and just freelance musician in the city, and the number one most important thing is a relationship. In other words, like the way that we met was that our mutual friend John Clancy was orchestrating a show, and he's like, "You got to get George." I was like, "I don't know George." He's like, "You got to get him." I said, "Okay," and we met, and he was right, because you fit that skill set. Great electric, also could play arco in tune with good tone, and you know, it was a little bit of a difficult book, and it was pretty specific. And so somebody mutual to both of us, who we both respected and trusted, was sort of like the pivot, you know. And you know, it's impossible for one person, even as a contractor, to really know how everybody plays. Now you have to have people you trust who are telling you, and that is developed over you know, relationships, playing with those people in the first place, trusting your ears, so on and so forth. For me, also as an active player, I have a lot of opportunities to also sort of be in situations where I am meeting new people or aware of new people, like maybe more in a firsthand sort of way than in a recommendation way, but still, I mean, I know that sometimes, like when there's been an off-Broadway show or something like come up, that I've asked you for a couple of recommendations, somebody who, you know, I would feel like has your kind of skill set, but maybe he's starting out and might be willing to do a certain kind of job or otherwise. So you develop those relationships. And I think that as our generation and even a younger generation continues to make inroads and become sort of more dominant, I think that, and this is part of the reason you're already seeing it, but I think you're going to continue to see more inroads for diversity in the pits, because we come from a generation as players and as people where it's it's much more just, uh, you know, there are no, or fewer, let me put, preconceived notions. It's just like who can do the job, who's cool to hang out with,
Right.
who's gonna do great. Because at the end
Right.
of the day, quality is really the most important thing when you're hiring, even playing, but when you're hiring a Broadway show, these Broadway shows, music and the orchestra is one of a number of components, obviously
Right.
acting, costumes, sets, everything else. But these shows are going to have 10, 15, $20 million budgets.
Mm.
And if you're responsible for the music department, as the contractors say,
Yeah.
you know, you your primary responsibility is you owe it to the producer, whoever's putting up the money for that show, and then in a secondary way, the patron who's paying the money for the show,
Yeah.
to have the best product that you can put forward for your slice of responsibility.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so that's the core thing. But what's happening now is that I think that there is, in a way, it's kind of like a golden age because more there are more people becoming interested, available, knowledge of those people.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I mean, you and I both know how you know sort of the cliche of people going from show to show to show in the old days, and
Oh yeah.
and it maybe whispers like, how's this person still like 7 shows later still working when everybody knows that he's maybe not showing up on time, or maybe he
Right.
doesn't play like he used to, or
Oh yeah.
whatever. And it was just like those lists of, for whatever contractors, or just the easy, just like, I have a show, this is my band. I have a show, this is my band. And then
Right.
10, 15 years later, nobody's checking to see if those people are still worthwhile. I think that there's been a good amount of weeding out of that mentality. And as a result,
Hmm.
newer, better, more focused players are at a premium.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and to me, that notion is a lot more colorblind. It's just like you just want good players
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
players who want to be there, and so on and so forth.
That's an interesting point. I think that it ties in with a number of sort of topics that have come up, be it in the panel discussions, be it in the live video with John Miller, be it in other follow-up videos, because I had like follow-up videos about that particular subject with actors as well. One being Norm Lewis, the other one being Michael Cerveris from Fun Home. And there is the one thing that has come up is for lack of better description, there is a sort of an amount of blame shifting, right? Of of responsibility diversion. Let me put it this way, where well, we don't have black musicians because we don't know them. That's number one, right? We don't have black musicians because they don't get hired, because they're not members of the union, because our producers tell us we want people with theater experience. So what does theater experience mean? Mostly white musicians, all right? Because if you look into the theater, again, you look into a pit and a bunch of white dudes look back at you. That's very much reality. I think that what you're saying is definitely representing of of a current situation where sort of an older guard is starting to move out. All right, because they're also getting to an age where perhaps playing is not what they're doing anymore. Right, that's a reality. Like, people are starting to use their pension, etc., etc. Spots are opening up. Um, in your estimation, what's a black musician to do who wants to get into the theater situation, who wants to get into the into that scene, into the possibility, who wants to get closer to it? I know for myself, because I've done it, right? I've had my process, right? What I'm interested in hearing, or in getting from you as contractor, what is your take on that? What's a black musician to do who has the skills, right? And also, I should preload that we're not talking about hiring people who don't have the skills, right? We're not talking about anything but people who are qualified, who, that's, there is no two ways about that. You have to be able to read, you have to be on time, you have to be pleasant to be around. All of those things, you have to have social skills. That's all of that is necessary. But in your estimation, what should a black musician do?
Okay. Uh, that is actually the core point of this conversation. And as a result, I just want to quickly answer or make one comment to the prior statement, which is about contractors and contracting. I find that sometimes, or maybe even often, there is a laziness from the contractors, not really digging deeper to find people. And that's where those lists just keep on sort of self-perpetuating, even as around, I mean, listen, there are tons of amazing players who move from show to show to show. I mean, right. many players. Right. But sometimes, it's, and then we've all seen it, the contract, as I said before, the contractor's job is to do the best job possible for the production.
Right.
And so sometimes that requires, doing the work, doing the research, right. Going to check players out, whatever, more than just, okay, this person probably can do the bill, plus I know him or her, and so right. So I just think that there is a responsibility there that should be noted. I don't know how rampant it is, but I think it is a little bit of a factor. Just one. As far as the main question that you were talking about, I mean, I think that, for me personally, exactly what you just said. I view this as basically a meritocracy. Like, if you play great, then I'm interested.
Right.
It's like nobody should care about anything else.
Right.
And so as a result, I would encourage as many people from any sort of diverse background to try to get into it, which I think a lot of people are. Right. But the answer of how you get into it that's the age-old question for almost anybody. Oh, yeah. And as we both know, it has to do with maybe finding a mentor who can start having you sub, or some shows obviously have a little bit more of a casting element, not being afraid to put your foot forward. I guess what I'm saying is, I would like to believe, I may be somewhat or completely off on this, I would like to believe that everybody has a good shot of getting a job as long as they fulfill those criteria of quality playing, team players, so on and so forth. Right. And that young, or maybe even not so young, but young Black players, Latino players, women should feel, again, it's a little hard for me to say because I don't have this specific experience.
Yeah. No, I get that.
Not only for who I am, but also just where I am in the scene. I'm already working.
Right.
So, why don't you tell just what was your entree into it?
My entree was very, very simple. I went to a clinic that John Miller did, and he spelled it out in no uncertain terms. Like, if you want to, I think the clinic was called How to Get and Keep the Broadway Gig, a Broadway gig or a theater gig, however, whatever the exact title was. And he kind of spelled it out, and I was sitting there and I took notes. And the first thing that he said was, take a look in your environment, see who's playing, contact those people. Now, mind you, at that point, I had been in New York for about 10 years, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but all of those 10 years were used up playing nonstop, right? So I had at the time a Rolodex of contacts that I could reach into and see, okay, this guy's over here, this lady is over there, this singer is just doing this show right now, etc., etc. So from those contacts, I was able to kind of piece together yet again another contact and another, a second line of communication to yet another group of players. Listen, can I? And then the question, that I asked them, I would like to get closer to this situation. Can I do that? How can I do that? And 9 out of 10, the answer was either a no or it was silence, right? And that actually brings me to this point that I wanted to make, because you touched on a very, very important relationship. Just to finish my story, I put myself out there. I made the contact. I called the people that I knew who were playing these gigs, and they put me in touch with either the bass players who were doing their shows, or if they didn't have a show and they were subbing on a show, they put me in touch with bass players of the shows that they were subbing on, right? And then the one guy who said yes to me, even though he didn't need to, was Tom Barney, right? And at the time, Tom, and still is, the bass player at the Lion King, he already had 7 subs, and I was number 8. And he was like, "You want to do this?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." Gave me the book, I made my recording. Sure enough, 2 months later, Tom calls, "So you said you wanted to do this. Are you ready?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess, yes, sir."
Right, and that's not an easy book.
That's not an easy book. No, it isn't. That's but that was my path, and that's kind of how it started for me.
But that's very much, a variation on a theme of most people. I mean, some people get lucky or, totally skip the line, or some people struggle more, but most people are kind of in that zone.
Yeah.
Like just slowly build it up. I wanted to just to say that, I mean, for me personally, I have, I'd like to think, but not just words, my actions have shown that I'm a big fan of giving new players opportunities. I mean, for instance, on Fun Home, the off-Broadway production, Emily, that was her first show. Monica, that was her first show. Doug, that was his first show. Chris Reza, I believe that was his first show. John Hatfield, not sure, but one of his first shows. I did another off-Broadway show a few years ago called Secret Life of Bees. And we had some veterans like John Walsh, great trumpet player, but
yeah, I was on it.
Right. I know. And that's why I was bringing it up. Is that because what happened was that for the workshop, all the dudes were playing, but then nobody, wanted to leave their shows. And it was like 6 first-time players. And that's what I meant about, like, you do the work, you try to find people who play great, are hungry, maybe willing to take that off-Broadway salary just to build the reputation and so on and so forth. So just to say that, and I'm not unique in this. I mean, I think that some of the younger generation of contractors also really enjoys that, and not just as lip service, but just to really help move the scene forward, because there are so many great young players. But at the end of the day, I also get, I mean, a little bit less over the last year, obviously, but regularly requests, resumes, requests and everything. And okay, I may not have responded to all of them, but I have to a lot. Right. And what I'll usually say to a resume is, a piece of paper is great, but that doesn't really help me. We need to hear you. I need to have some people that I know and trust sort of like vouch a little bit for, because as we know, especially like me growing up in a classical setting as a, adolescent violinist, you know, and around some spectacular players. And knowing what I know now, a lot of those people, they don't really have the temperament. They wouldn't have had the temperament to do a Broadway gig,
Right.
or maybe the style, maybe much too aggressive, much too soloistic, much too, you know,
Exposed.
exposed, whatever the case may be. Now, obviously, a lot of them do, but so that's that kind of thing that if you could have like either a primary opinion being what I've heard, what you've, what making your own opinion, but if not, a secondary opinion of somebody, I don't pretend to know bass playing as well as you, or drumming as well as Clancy, or whatever.
Right,
So
right.
there's no shame in asking somebody who you trust, what do you think of this player? Or if you're recommending somebody, or, that's going to carry some weight, because I'm assuming you're not going to recommend somebody who wouldn't be at least up to the standard that we need for, a given gig.
Yeah, no, most definitely. It, that whole, and that's kind of the relationship that I wanted to talk about briefly, and that is the shareholder versus sub situation, right? There's a lot of, and again, this is where the blame shifting or the divergence of responsibility comes in, right? Because the some of the creative teams, some of the higher ups will say, well, I mean, this is up to the musicians to bring, whoever in, right? Yet when they are asked to bring, to present their list of subs, they get sometimes very, very concrete pushback in terms of, this is a newbie and I don't know about that, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that I think, together with perhaps the laziness of not being current anymore, or not trying to be current anymore, but that is certainly something that needs to be observed and needs to be exposed to a certain degree, because in the end, it is the musician's responsibility, right? 100%, right?
Yeah, there's, I mean, now we're talking about, like, that's one of those dynamics with a music director versus subs, which is, that's like a Pandora's box.
Yeah, and also let me just add to that. Like, it could be arrangers, music supervisor. It could be freaking director. Okay.
Absolutely.
This,
Yeah, I mean, and those are things that need to be navigated. I mean, obviously, if a music director has a specific point based on prior experience, or actual performance on, like, let's say a first or second show or whatever, that's one thing. But just when it's like a conceptual, like, I don't like the notion of this person coming in, I totally agree that does cross the line of what's
that's unacceptable.
And yet, of course, like with any industry, when you have a power dynamic, it's difficult sometimes to navigate those things, because at the end of the day, it's like the classic, if your boss is telling you to do something, not even like bad, but just like, you pretty much, it's your job description to follow what your boss says. Now, what happens when they're saying something you don't agree with? Not just for the sake of not agreeing, but because they might be disregarding certain rules, or skirting certain things. And obviously, some music directors are sort of notorious for that. Others are totally cool. Lots are totally cool.
Yeah.
As long as they're willing to give everybody they trust the players. See, that's the other thing. Trust is such a big thing in terms of recommendation, but also in terms of, like, this is something I haven't really understood, is that if you, as a music director or a conductor, think that you have a really good band, why don't you trust them to take care of their business? you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So anyway, it's a little bit
It's
of a
that's
tangent.
no, but that's it's not even that much of a tangent because it goes exactly to the minute details that keep black musicians from getting hired. All right, it's not like we don't necessarily live in the times of overt racism anymore, right? Nevertheless, this racism that still exists is has shifted, right? It has changed its face. And um, of course, you are going to be hard pressed to find anyone in the creative teams, meaning the higher ups of any endeavor, just flat out saying, no, I only want white musicians,
Yeah,
right?
I find it difficult to believe that that would
That's
happen.
that's gonna be really hard to find, right? But what they will say is stuff like, we want people with experience, right? We want a good fit, right? We want yeah, people with experience is kind of the most
The buzzword kind of.
like this that is code right there, right? And that's kind of an insidious way of scurrying the edges of these people, but not those people, right? So there's a lot of othering going on what that is concerned, and I think that you know, in order to sort of keep the momentum, keep the conversation going, and keep people getting hired, because this is about employment, about nothing else. Like, this is about people trying to make a living. Um, it's important to sort of, to a certain degree, expose code, but also perhaps pushback. You know, I think that there is one thing that came to my mind, and that is, in our current situation, in our current scene, so to speak, we have contractors. We have mostly white and male contractors. That's, yourself included. It's, I mean, I
Absolutely.
hate to tell you, that's what you are.
I'm aware. Painfully aware.
So, do you think that the diversity issue, the racial equity issue, would benefit from a contractor who's not white and male, where perhaps that would open up, avenues, possibilities for people of color, black musicians, female musicians, to be more recognized, to
Yeah.
get more,
Well,
into
I mean,
the conversation.
the short answer is obviously yes.
Yeah.
Uh, but the secondary answer is, again, um, I think that the younger breed of contractors is has already demonstrated
Mm.
that they're much more, or to put it differently, that it's about doing the work, finding new people, not just going with the same groups.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you experience something along these lines. I mean, we all have as players, where, like, on some of your first gigs, you couldn't believe that such and such a player was on there. You'd heard that they were like some, fancy touring musician,
Right.
or somebody. They're like, what are they doing here? And then, like, as you get a little bit more into it, you realize, okay, well, everybody's working, and
Right.
also, like, the music scene changed, and all sorts of other factors. But what's interesting is that as time goes by, you also sort of realize that that's can be a little bit less like those legacy type of people. Like, that can be, weighting down the movement forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, again, the more contractors are actual players in the pits and active freelancers, which is um, happening a little bit more now than it used
Yeah.
to be,
Yeah.
the better, because they're much more. I mean, they might still be subject to various pressures and vagaries of the production, or their own biases, or their own opinions, or whatever, but they're a lot more in the scene and aware of who's playing, who's doing what,
Yeah.
and should be, as a good contractor, open to all sorts of, you know, of new
Players.
players.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I get that. I think that's a very, very important point right there. I think that the dual nature of that particular existence has to be firmly rooted in a life as a freelancer and a life as a contractor. I think that as soon as one becomes more than the other, there is a shift, right? It could be, for instance, sure, life as a contractor. On the other hand, life as a music fan, music aficionado, who really just is in the scene, who's out there, who's checking out gigs, who's doing, who's still, as a fan, interested. If that is not the case anymore, then all of a sudden your social circle becomes very small. And what we're seeing in terms of employment and who gets picked for employment is always, to a certain degree, a mirror of your social environment, right? Very often in these conversations, I find I am confronted or exposed to arguments of, I didn't know people were there, right? Well, why don't you know that people are there? You know what I mean? This is like, we live, supposedly we live in the same year. I mean, we might not live in the same US, but we are still in the same year. We're still not in 64 or 58 or 72 or whenever, or 84. So that's an interesting, and again, this is where the dynamic of blame shifting is sort of comes into play. It's an interesting side effect of these conversations, no doubt.
And one thing I wanted to point out is that that, and this is, I'm just viewing this more as an observer, and it doesn't, as obviously you can imagine, specifically affect me in a personal way in this context. But in terms of trying to help further diversity, what's not helpful is, and this has happened in some shows, that some subpar players have been hired. Whether it's because a production's trying to be overly hip and cool, or somebody just insisted, or what have you. I'm wondering what your feeling is about that, because again, we've talked about how like the baseline of quality should be across. Then subtleties of like personalities, maybe stylistic specialties, certain whatever relationships.
Well, I mean, I can give you a really good answer what that is concerned, because I have been in the situation where I got called in to replace a regular who, after many years of a career musician, right, many years of playing shows, got to the point of it just doesn't work out anymore, right? And I was the one who had to come in on a moment's notice and learn the show that afternoon, watch it that evening, and play it the next day, right? So I think that the yes, as with every group, as with every ethnic group, as with every gender group, you will find players that are not up for the job. There's no doubt about that, right? If we're really taking a closer look at that argument, we have to acknowledge the fact that simply because most of the players right now are white and male, most of the players who quote unquote fuck up are white and male too.
Absolutely, no doubt.
That's the reality. So again, like the perception of shining a light on this hiring situation was not the right one.
But that's sort of what I'm pointing to in terms of the double standard, which is that if let's say a young black trombone player or whatever is hired, nobody knows him, but they're kind of taking a chance, and for whatever reason, it's just not the right fit, not enough jazz, chops, he's or classic, whatever the
Right.
case may be. You know, I think that that's the double standards that could sort of set back
Yeah.
a little bit psychologically. What to your point
No,
that
that is a total double standard, and that, I mean, I've seen white players stumble back after in intermission, stumble back into the theater and miss the door because they were so drunk. I mean, we've been there, okay? This shit is real. Um, but understand that if that
that's like a different Broadway podcast.
that is a different one, no doubt. But understand that if that were a black player, um, the double standard would kick in by the time they reach the pit.
Hmm.
All right, and that is, I guess, fundamentally, sort of one of the stepping stones of this big change that hopefully we're able to achieve. That we are not going to, like, it's impossible to uh, completely fix this situation in one conversation, but hopefully, we're going to add to it
Yeah.
in this
What,
conversation, in subsequent conversations or whoever, right?
yeah.
So
Well, what I was just to kind of wrap up on that point is that I completely agree, and therefore, yes, what I would say is that all all sorts of players of every instrument, every diverse background should be going for it, and I think that there's much more openness,
mm,
uh, real openness now. I'm sure not all the way,
right,
but I think that there has been, especially with more and more younger or next generations kind of becoming more dominant and more power players.
right,
There's definitely it's a better climate and it
yeah,
steadily improving climate.
right,
And as far as getting, how to do it, that's the old fashioned, like, as you said, networking,
yeah,
uh, be prepared.
yeah,
Like what you're saying with Tom Barney, like you got the call, but the call was like, you ready to go? Not like, so, and it was like, he gave you, he left you alone and
yeah,
sort of said, he was kind of testing you in a sense. Like, is he
yeah,
going
yeah,
to learn it
yeah,
without me saying anything?
yeah.
So that's a good thing for younger players or players outside the scene to think about as well.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, no doubt, no doubt. No, this is it. I. There's one thing that John Miller says a lot, and that is we are all our own contractors, and I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of, like, we need to have our social circles together, right? We need to have our contacts together. We need to know musicians, in other words. We need to reach out. We need to be open what that is concerned. We cannot really, at least not in my experience, you cannot really achieve longevity with just one set of people.
Yeah, but isn't that in a way quite literally what being a good musician is about, which is
Of course,
listening to others.
of
And
course,
if
yeah,
you're
yeah,
listening, then you expand. I mean, you might still have your favorite people to play with just because they're your buddies and everything else, but the awareness, and
yeah,
through awareness comes, respecting, and it increases the circle, and then
yeah.
the circle grows and more players become a part of it. So
Yeah, no doubt, and that is, not only important for black players, but that is incredibly important for white players, because that is, that is the
of
one
course,
group,
yeah.
that is currently, whether they, admit to it, whether they are active in it, but that's the group of players that definitely has benefited from a lack of diversity, because a lack of diversity also means a lack of competition, right? So
Yes,
now you don't have to compete with, the player who, um, had to move heaven and earth to get to where they are, and therefore their level of motivation is, you know, on a different plateau than your motivation, no matter where you're coming from, no matter what your background is as a white player, right? So I think that, the being able to open yourself up to, um, a social environment that is more inclusive, right, will definitely reflect in, the people that are going to reach out to you and say, listen, I want to sub on this, can I at least come in? I understand that maybe you have already all your subs, maybe you don't, but
Yeah.
do you see what I'm saying?
Of course. One thing I do want to point out, maybe not the right phrase, more sort of that I anticipate is going to be a reality is obviously we're now nearly a year into a Broadway shutdown and a artistic shutdown.
Right.
And let's just for argument's sake say there are going to be another 6 to 8, 9 months also. Right. So what we're talking about is a huge pause at the same time as so much upheaval, awareness, and all of the social things that happened primarily through last spring and summer, but now are just much more in the presence of and the awareness of people. So what I'm saying is, the arts and artistic people are, hopefully, it's a little bit of a stereotype, but for the most part, open-minded, talented, creative people. Not every single one of us, but
some have to work really hard at that.
No, that's true. But I mean, globally as an industry. So I guess I'm not predicting anything, but I think it will be interesting to see when things come back, if there's going to be a momentum, just almost like a fait accompli of like a little bit of a new reality. I'm not suggesting it'll be like completely like a new world, but I think that there's a good possibility that there has been a bit of a reset for creative, artistic type of people. And it'll be interesting to see, like in the run-up of, there's going to be like a lot of new shows coming in because not some of them are going to hold on and some won't. Yeah. And, also who knows exactly how long shows are going to stay open. Like maybe the era of the mega long run shows is coming to an end, and maybe there's going to be more turnover just because there might be fewer. Like there's a lot of possible openings potentially for new players to come in, for scenes to change, a little shift to happen. So I'm going to be interested to see how and what that looks like.
Yeah, a bunch of people have also moved away. That's
yes.
That influences the turnover of musicians as well.
That's
just the reality.
So in a year we'll do a follow up, and we'll see if anything has anything follow up to the follow up. We'll see if anything has moved in the right direction.
Yeah, this fingers crossed, man. I think that I do agree with you there that there is movement. Yeah, there's definitely a change in awareness. I think that what happened, because we're very close to the year. It's been 1 year since Ahmaud Arbery was killed in Georgia, I believe. And then we had all these instances of police killings, and we had very, very important. We had the Amy Cooper situation. Spell out in Central Park, which supposedly, New York, democratic city, liberal people, etc. Yet, very, very nasty, stereotypical thinking. Not all of a sudden, but very quickly reared its ugly head. And I think that was very much, perhaps a needed push, especially the Amy Cooper situation.
That was kind of like, especially in New York, kind of like, wait, this happens here, kind of.
And a lot of white people had to, kind of were like, oh shit, this is me. This is this is a mirror right here. This is argumentation that I use. That's etc. Not saying that I personally use it, but I think that was the thought process for a lot of white people. So I think that I agree with you that there is this, we have this chance right now to sort of reset. Okay, we've been going into one direction for a very, very long time. I personally don't think that the inequities, the racial inequities that have continued, since, I'm gonna say, since the 70s, really. Um, I don't think that that's benefiting Broadway. I don't think that all of that does is that it adds to it a level of fear, a level of uncertainty, a level of cliquishness, that does not produce good music and definitely doesn't produce good shows.
Actually, you just reminded me of something I wanted to point out, which is also, I think, an opportunity that's already started to move things forward, which is that stylistically, musically, a lot of shows uh, are not what they used to be.
Right.
Lots of more like band,
Yeah.
uh, sort of multi stylized or different styles within shows,
Yeah.
more small groups, versatile groups that can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um, and that's actually really good for getting a whole new, not even talking about the racial angle, but getting a new crew of really hungry, top-notch, good players
Mm.
who can do certain kinds of things that maybe didn't used to be required
Right.
in you know the
Traditional.
the
Yeah.
traditional types of shows,
Yeah.
and so that's going to have a personnel turnover
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
of itself. So there's definitely a good opportunity. There's
Yeah.
there's already been progress, I think,
Yeah.
from my view.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that things can move ahead. Uh, it'll be really interesting to see when we come back how quickly. But I do think that the trend will keep moving in the right
We'll
direction,
we'll
probably more
continue.
rapidly than it has been.
Yeah. 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 Most definitely. I mean, let's also not forget, like, it will move forward if we make it move forward.
Yeah.
I
But I
mean,
guess what I'm saying is I think that the people who are making those decisions, more of them are more interested in that than
yeah.
before.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So that from that standpoint,
Yeah, 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 most definitely. Well, listen, Antoine, I don't want to take up too much of your time, any more of your time. I do appreciate you taking the time and making yourself available today. I totally understand this is not an easy topic. This is not an easy conversation to have. And I do want to express my gratitude to you for taking this on. Not everybody does that, and I think that's definitely speaks for you. Um,
well,
so, you
yeah,
know,
thank you. I mean, it was my pleasure speaking with you. And obviously, I don't pretend to have an expertise, but I just basically uh, love great musicians and want to work with them. So
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
about it. So whoever that might be, that's who I'm interested in.
Awesome, awesome. Well, listen, Antoine, stay safe out there. All the best to you, to your family. Try to stay sane as much as possible. It's
All right.
not the easiest thing to do. But and hopefully we'll see each other in a couple months. Somewhere on the strip.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Take care, George.
All
All
right.
the
Thank you. Later.